Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the SEEK Network, and we are so pleased that you are joining us today for this conversation with the Tanenbaum Center. We are thrilled to have the Reverend Mark Fowler with us, leading a discussion about Tanenbaum's work in interreligious understanding. Mark has done his work through the years with multiple corporations and now has come to Tanenbaum and directs all of their functions. He has his degree from Duke, has been trained in mediation and conflict resolution with the New York City Department of Education, and is a graduate of the One Spirit Interfaith Seminary, where he also serves as the Dean of second-year students. Mark is a widely sought after speaker and facilitator, and is someone that we are thrilled to be in conversation with, and that we will be welcoming with the other folks from Tanenbaum to our conference February 23rd through 26th in Atlanta next year. And so without further ado, I'm pleased to turn it over to Mark, and please do remember to put questions or comments into the chat so that Mark can respond to you. Mark, thanks for joining us. Friends, apologies. It looks like Mark has dropped. We are getting him back right now. You're back with us, Mark.
Did I fall off for a second?
You fell off for just a second, so welcome back.
Okay. So
saying all those nice things about you, and but now you're back, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
That was all for a dramatic pause.
I loved it. It was great. So you'll get to do that in Atlanta as well. We'll have you leave the room, come back in, leave the room, come back. No, it's great. So Mark, I'm turning it over to you. And thank you all for joining us. We'll look forward to talking with Mark now.
Thank you all so much. I have to apologize. I am not at home. A family member needed some support today, so I'm toggling with an internet system I'm not familiar with. But I'm happy to be with all of you. Thank you, Joe, so much for that really warm introduction. We're excited to be with you, and very excited to be with you in Atlanta next year. Tanenbaum, if I can get my share screen happening here. Okay, great. I think I'm still connected. So Tanenbaum, the Tanenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding is our full name, Tanenbaum for short. We are a secular, non-sectarian, not-for-profit. Our mission is to combat religious prejudice, promote justice, and build respect for religious difference. And we pretty much take the position that we are different in terms of the ways in which we believe and practice, and that there will be likely ways in which we differ. But we believe that those differences can be addressed with a degree of civility and respect for those differences. You can see on the screen that we have 5 areas where we conduct our work. In the world of peace building, we study and identify the role that religiously motivated individuals, peace actors, work for in active conflict zones around the world. It is our Peacemakers in Action network. We have named 34 peacemakers to date. 30 of them are alive. 4 of them have died of natural causes, and they all conduct their work and are religiously motivated to do so. We've written case studies on many of our peacemakers that have been combined into books, but most recently we are launching podcasts that tell the stories of our peacemakers in their own voices. And our 2 newest podcasts are of our peacemaker, Reverend Jackie Manapudi from Indonesia, and Dashani Jayawera from Sri Lanka. We also work in education. We have been providing training and resources for teachers and school systems for over 20 years with 2 goals in mind. One is that in the practice of learning about differences, that young people are free and supported to explore the differences that they see in their neighborhoods and in their communities around religious belief and practice. And further, we want educators to be comfortable and competent to teach about religious differences. So the majority of our work is in that function. In healthcare, we train and provide resources for both medical and non-medical staff on the ways in which patients and families make decisions that are based in their religious beliefs and practices. We have been doing that work for about 18 years now and have created a number of curricula for residency programs, for medical schools, and nursing curricula as well. And we published a book called The Medical Manual for Religio-Cultural Competence, which actually gives medical providers and non-clinical staff a way to think about some of the concerns that religious people might have in the healthcare experience. And rather than trying to do a primer on individual beliefs, we created a framework called the trigger topics. And they are 15 areas of the patient care experience where patients may have decisions that they're making or their religious beliefs and practices are influencing the decisions that they make. We also work in global corporations and in large not-for-profits and provide consulting, training, and resources for companies that are creating inclusive work environments, including the dimension of religious belief and practice. We provide high-level briefings for senior executives in companies. We provide training for managers on what does inclusive leadership look like when you're considering the religious beliefs of your teams, as well as of your clients and your customers. And we also provide training around the intersection of religious identity and other identities in the workplace, like sexual orientation and gender identity, race, ethnicity, and also the unique experiences of women who are women of faith and what their experience is like in the workplace. And in interreligious affairs, following the work of our namesake, Rabbi Mark Tanenbaum, the area of interreligious affairs continues to look at the roots of religious prejudice, the places where either in sacred text or in practice that we yet have created or given ourselves permission to discriminate against one another. And we look to examine those traditions and engage faith communities in their own self-examination around what's possible and what is the evolution of the use of those texts. So that's kind of a broad overview of Tanenbaum. We have about 20 employees, so we like to think about ourselves as an organization that punches a little bit above our weight, but we certainly have been engaged in this work for almost 30 years, and next year actually marks our 30th anniversary. So I'm going to bring up two questions that I'd like for you to consider where you are. And I'd like for you to consider whether you would agree or strongly agree with each of these statements. So the first statement is, I always treat people of other religious faiths with respect. Think about whether you would agree or strongly agree with that statement. And now I'm going to bring up another statement. And again, the instruction is, please consider whether you would agree or strongly agree with this statement. People of other religious faiths always treat me with respect. So if you would agree or strongly agree with that statement, just kind of in your mind, raise your hand, if you will. These two statements come from a Gallup poll that was conducted in 2004, and it was called the Tolerance Index. And in that example that had over 3,500 people participating in the survey, 95% of people said that they always treated people of other religious faiths with respect. But only 65% of the same group of people said that people of other religious faiths always treat them with respect. And we've used this example and used this exercise in all of our training, certainly for the 14 years that I've been working at Tanenbaum, and we see the results usually are very close to the same. most people feel that they are treating others respectfully or engaging in behaviors of respect, while fewer actually have the experience of being respected. And we can attribute this a little bit to the idea that we don't always know what respect looks like for another person or for another group of people. Many of us are certainly familiar with the golden rule to treat others the way we would like to be treated. But we are very much grounding ourselves in the platinum rule as well, which is to treat others the way they would like to be treated. And the only way that we can really find that out is if we are in conversation and working with people. To that end, I'd like for you to consider, where are the places where you're likely to encounter religious diversity? You'll see the data on the screen comes from a survey that was conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute and was published in The Atlantic, called American Democracy in Crisis: The State of Pluralism in a Divided Nation. And you can see the places where people are most likely to encounter religious diversity are not necessarily in our homes. Certainly in the workplace, 70% of people are likely to meet someone and engage with someone of a different religious background. In friendship circles, in a school that I'm attending. But notice, not less in our religious services, less in a school where someone's child is attending, and even less in someone's family or at civic gatherings. So if you will, there's a little bit more of an onus for us to consider, how do we reach out and build bridges with communities, with religious and spiritual communities, and even non-religious communities that are not like us, if we're more likely to meet people in the workplace or in school or even in friendship circles. So how do we build those bridges? How do we find out what respect looks like for other people? And the answer to that is in thinking very critically, but also perhaps a little bit vulnerably about the ways in which we are encountering people in our regular everyday life. When we look at interacting across difference, to build this out further, you can see that the blue marker shows where people are likely to interact across difference in terms of religion. But when we think about race and ethnicity, still the workplace is the place where we're most likely to meet people of different backgrounds. Schools and our friend circles, less opportunity, not none, certainly, but a little bit less opportunity where we're going to meet people of different political parties, different sexual orientations and gender identities, and different races. So if you will, it's going to take something for us to actually work across and build across those differences and learn about those differences from one another. When we look at United States religious affiliation, certainly there have been any number of changes over the years, some that we have been seeing in real time in the last 10 to 15 years. So when we look at the number of people who identify as Protestant in the United States, you can see that there has been a decline in the number of people who identify in that way since 2009. And in 2009 and today is the first time in United States history when the number of Protestants in the United States has been less than 50% of the population. We also noted that with Catholicism, with people who identify as Catholic, they make up 20% of the population. But one of the things that we want to bear in mind is that without immigration from Latin America, the number of native-born Catholics would be somewhere around 10 or 11% of the United States population. So immigration, if you will, has a great deal to do with the number of people who personally identify as Catholic. The unaffiliated population is a population that has been growing over the last certainly 11, 12 years. And I would venture to say that there are more people who are publicly willing to say that they are unaffiliated from a standard or a mainline tradition of some kind. But there is diversity even within this group, which we'll talk about a little bit in a moment. And so when we talk about unaffiliated, We are talking about people who identify as atheists, people who identify as agnostic, and people who identify as spiritual but unaffiliated. And that population, the group of people who are spiritual but unaffiliated, are the lion's share of that group. When we look at all other faiths in the United States, all other faiths other than Christian faiths and those people who identify as unaffiliated, we are looking at 7% total. So that includes all Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Jains, Wiccans, anyone who identifies other than mainline Christian or Protestant, Catholic, or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Orthodox Christianity, 7% of the population. So while depending on where you physically are in the country, the religious landscape may seem more or less diverse, we are still a country that is predominantly Christian, but that is rapidly changing over time. And so again, those opportunities to learn and understand what does respect look like for another person are not as easy as it may seem. In terms of some of the trending topics that we've been seeing, and I'm sure that you've been seeing where you are, we have a list here. Certainly, we have seen an uptick in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in New York and around the country and around the world. We have also seen a trend that's not specifically related here, what I would say over the last 5 to 8 years, with all of the attention with various groups, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matters movement, ongoing issues around sexual orientation and gender identity, that people are beginning to stand more for the idea of, I want to be seen, I want to be heard, and I want to be included. And that includes people of all religious and spiritual beliefs and practices as well. Internationally, what we see around religion is that there's more attention being paid, and we're seeing more attention to the ways in which religion is built into society's functioning, and in some instances, the human rights abuses that are happening right underneath our nose. So why is it important? Why is religious diversity important to talk about in your parish, but also in life in general? So I want to share some things with you. One is that Tanenbaum, as I said, is 29 years old. I've been with Tanenbaum for almost 14 years, and we have done a number of bodies of work with various religious and spiritual communities. Certainly in education, we've worked with a number of religious schools across the spectrum. In healthcare, we have worked very concertedly with faith-based hospitals or hospitals that have a faith-based history. And right now, our senior associate in our healthcare program is doing a follow-up white paper on the experiences of LGBTQ plus patients in faith-based hospitals. Because there is a growing need and a growing call for, again, patients of all religious and spiritual backgrounds wanting their beliefs and their identities to be acknowledged and respected in their healthcare experience. And in peace building, Tanenbaum sits on the Multi-Faith Advisory Council at the United Nations. And that council is made up of a variety of organizations who are working towards peace in a variety of ways. So we've been doing this work for a while and have seen any number of iterations of it. But I'd like to share with you some examples for you to consider in terms of the kind of work that we do, and then maybe consider what are some of the kinds of efforts you could engage in to build respect for religious difference. One of the models that we use is called the 10 bias danger signs. And we have used this primarily in our workplace work, but I think it does have application when we're talking about the ways in which we might be engaging with other religious and spiritual communities. So the 10 bias danger sign really encourages every one of us to look at not the overt instances of bias or discrimination, but some of the more subtle ones that may be the kinds of things that we say at our kitchen table or jokes that we might share with one another. But considering, how do you respond when you see someone whose outer attire actually communicates something about their religious or spiritual belief? Diet, when you are having, when you're working with another religious or spiritual community, do you consider, are the options available palatable to everyone? So are there kosher options? Are there halal options? Are there vegetarian options for those people who observe very strict dietary restrictions? Prayer and devotion are two different things that we talk about in the workplace. Devotion having to do with, is the space set up and are there opportunities for people to observe their faith, whether it's in a quiet room, in corporate offices, or even at a conference? We have the conference coming up in February. If there are going to be guests from other religious or spiritual traditions, is there a place for them to pray, to observe, those kinds of things? Noting holidays as a really great opportunity to explore not just our own holidays, but also other holidays in the calendar, and how do we extend greetings to people and warm wishes on a date of significance to them. So these are all some of the kinds of ways that we can begin to think about how am I managing building respect for religious difference in some of these ways and others. So I'd like for you to consider, and I'm going to stop sharing in a moment because I would love to see in the chat, one of the activities that we engage people in, definitely in our education work, but we're seeing more activity in our corporate work around this, is to have people consider, what does respect look like? What does respect sound like? And what does respect feel like? And I realize now that I actually don't have to stop sharing, because I'd like to keep this image up. And when we talk about respecting each other, I'm really asking you to think about the behaviors of respect, not just the thoughts about it. But when you think about the behaviors of respect, what does respect look like? What could somebody do? What would a person do that you would say respectful words that people would communicate respect? And ultimately, how would you want someone to, what would someone's experience of respect feel like? What language could you put to that? So I'd love to just see if anyone would like to share in the chat, from your perspective, what does respect look like? What does it sound like? Or what does it feel like? So the chat is open for that now. I'll share a story with you as people are sharing things in the chat. So we had the opportunity at one point to work with a school, public school in Long Island. And we did this activity in every grade level. And what the principal then reported at some point was that she knew that the activity was taking hold because she came across two young girls who were actually writing out their rules for respect for their friendship. And they wanted to be clear with each other about what respect would look like or sound like or feel like. I'd like for you to also consider another example. This example comes from a sim clinic, a simulated clinic experience that we have created in our healthcare work. And in our healthcare work, one of the things I said that we work with medical providers on how to interact with patients around decisions that they're making based on their religious beliefs and practices. So this is one of our simulated clinic experiences. Susie is a Christian woman who has a disease of the liver and had been on the transplant list. But she comes to her doctor and now says, I've been sick for a long time now. And so I've been doing a lot of soul searching and have decided to leave this up to God. And what Susie is doing is she has taken herself off of the liver transplant list. So the question that I would ask all of us to consider is, if Susie were someone who was a member of your community, or you in some way were volunteering or providing service to Susie, you might be a chaplain, or you might be a person on your hospitality committee. How might you interact with Susie, given that she is making this decision to take herself off of the liver transplant list and turning this over to God's hand? I also want to thank, I believe it's Millard, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, for your response. Respect as a behavior, listens, hears the whole story, invites more. Respect as a behavior has an empathetic and patient face and body language. Wonderful. We also have a response from Amy. Thank you so much. Respect looks like active listening. And that could be silent listening sometimes. Yes, my mother always says, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and I should use my ears more and my mouth less. Love to hear anyone's thoughts about how you might respond to Susie, or maybe even what are some of the concerns that you might have with the decision that Susie is making, or how to support Susie in the decisions that she's making. Would love to hear anyone's thoughts on that. Thank you, Carol. Respect feels like being heard and valued. Thank you so much. And I'm going to move forward a little bit. I believe it's Jean. Thank you so much. I'd want to make sure she was of sound mind and educated with all options. Absolutely. You want to make sure that Susie is actually making a decision of her free choice, and that she is engaging with this decision with all of the information. Absolutely. And when we make these sim clinics available, if you will, as you can see, it is a virtual patient and it's a virtual experience. So depending on the choices that the medical student or the doctor makes, will take them down a particular path. And the ultimate goal of this encounter is that whatever Susie's decisions are, that she be left with the experience of having her religious and spiritual beliefs respected. Now, they may not always be agreed with by the medical provider, but we certainly don't want to demean Susie in any way, or to make her feel poorly or badly because of the decisions that she's making. Thank you so much. Let me move on, and certainly please feel free to continue to offer thoughts in the chat about any of these circumstances that I've brought up. One of the things that we present to our education work, in all of our work actually, are these competencies for respectful communication. And as you're just interacting with one another within your parishes, but then also considering ways in which you might be reaching out and working with other religious and spiritual communities, these are some competencies that we think are important for people to continue to work on. Some of them may seem obvious, but I believe that all of them require our attention in one way or another. So first, avoiding assumptions. We want to make sure that the assumptions that that's how the brain works. We, kind of make connections between information that we've had in the past, or experiences that we've had in the past. But we want to notice when we are not just making an assumption, but acting from it, but taking action or interacting with someone based on our assumptions, as opposed to information that they can share with us. We think it's critically important to avoid the spokesperson syndrome. So that can look like someone standing up and saying, I can tell you what the experience of Hindus are. More to the point, they can tell you what their experience as a Hindu person is, but they can't tell you and speak on behalf of all Hindus. And likewise, we want to be mindful that we are not putting words in other people's mouths, if you will, about their experience, based on perhaps the experience we've had with a few people in our life. The platinum rule I've already spoken about. Being curious and asking respectfully. So you may have had the experience in life where someone has asked you a question, but you have the sense that they're really not curious about your answer. They just want to confirm information or maybe assumptions that they already have. So in talking about respectful communication and building respect for religious difference, we want to engage in that activity with a genuine sense of curiosity and ask respectfully. Certainly, listening actively has been something that's been mentioned in the chat. Identifying and debunking stereotypes. Now, I can speak for myself, I have lots of stereotypes. I have lots of ideas about people and things that have come from my lived experience that I have to always be mindful. Am I having a conversation in the present moment with a person, or am I having a conversation that is built on stereotypes? And when I see the stereotypes that I have to debunk them. I have to do that work. Addressing behavior and not belief is also one of the kind of keystones, cornerstones of our work, which is that we do believe differently. But one of the things that we can all manage is our behavior toward one another. So when you're building relationship, both within your religious or spiritual community and outside of it, you want to pay attention to not just your behavior, but interact with people's behaviors and not their beliefs. None of us knows everything or will know everything about all of the ways in which people believe and practice. So we definitely want to encourage lifelong learning about the places where our traditions are similar and where they are different. And then finally, acknowledge and apologize for mistakes made. So here's the thing, when doing this work to build respect for religious difference, there will be moments where we step in it, where we say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And we want to be able to be courageous when we have those moments and to acknowledge that it happened, to apologize for it, and then certainly to ask for the invitation to continue to build. And I noticed a couple of things have come up in the chat. A response around, let's see, from Eloise, sometimes there is a bigger difference with another Christian because they do not know the same God and their decisions seem wrong for the God that we know. Thank you so much for that, Eloise, because yes, the perception that someone has a different understanding or a different way of engaging in that we may have different ideas or beliefs about who and what God is. And that can guide our decisions. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Susan Reese, thank you. If I were meeting with Susie, I would encourage her to tell me more about her decision so that I could feel she has looked at all her options and has not simply given up. I have talked with many cancer patients who have thoughtfully decided to stop treatment and spend their remaining time with their family. Thank you so much for sharing this because yes, one of the greatest tools that we have is to ask more questions and ask them respectfully with that real curious, authentic generosity of wanting to know more about a person's decisions and their experiences. Thank you all so much. Some things that we can recommend that you might want to take on in some of your parishes. From the perspective of peace building, I mentioned earlier that we've launched the Peacemakers in Action podcast. We invite you to listen to them and share them with others who you think would be interested in hearing about these courageous stories of these individuals who are working in conflict zones around the world. In education, we are releasing our two newest second volumes of our curricula, Religions in My Neighborhood, as well as World Olympics. We also have a number of webinars that are available for educators on how to create inclusive classrooms that are respectful of religious differences, and 3 webinars in particular that are grade appropriate for elementary, middle, and high school educators that we did in partnership with Learning for Justice, formerly Teaching Tolerance. In healthcare, there are any number of resources on our webpage, many of them for free. So we do encourage all of the curricula are free, and we do have webinars there as well. So please, we invite you to avail yourselves of those. And then in workplace, we have a great number of resources and consulting that we do with global corporations and large not-for-profits. And we will be hosting, I'm very excited about this, in the fall, in partnership with Fordham University. We're going to be hosting a conference looking at economic models that are inspired by religious beliefs and practices. In particular, we will be looking at the economy of communion as a economic model for how business can be conducted. So all of these are free and available to anyone to attend. As I mentioned, next year is our 30th anniversary, so we'll have a number of events going on and prayerfully opportunities for all of us to get together as we're comfortable. And this fall, we actually do have a comedy night that will be taking place likely in October. And depending on, last year we had our comedy night virtually, and if we're able to gather safely in person, there will be opportunity to do that. And if not, we will all certainly need a laugh. So our comedy night will take place virtually, and we invite you all to participate with us. And I believe my colleague Nancy has shared about some of this information in the chat. So I'd like to everyone just to consider, what are some ways to encourage more respectful conversations about religious difference in your parish or community? Please feel free to share that information in the chat. And with that, also consider, please, what are some next steps that you might take to build a more religiously inclusive and respectful world? And I'm going to leave my contact information up for a moment. You can certainly reach us all at info@tanenbaum.org. My email address is mfowler@tanenbaum.org. And we actually just launched a new website. So please take a look and peruse through, and hopefully you'll find some information that's useful there. So with that, I would love to open this up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, if you put them in the chat, I am happy to answer them. So I see that there's a question on how my personal faith has been enriched, changed, and or challenged through this work. So when I was looking for, and I appreciate the question, thank you so much. When I started with this work, I was not a clergy person. I was a lay person. I have always been a member of a religious or spiritual community. I was raised Protestant and then was unchurched for a couple of years during high school, and kind of came back to an interdenominational Protestant church in my young adulthood, and then attended a church that was, I would say, probably more Baptist in nature, but that had been created in particular for LGBTQ people who felt disaffected from their traditions. That was not necessarily my journey, but it was a community of great power, and I learned a lot. When I started at Tanenbaum, I actually wasn't looking for a job per se around involving religion, but I thought when I read the job description for an educator and trainer, I thought that this was interesting because I'd never really thought about taking a job that involved my faith so directly, and also noting that Tanenbaum was a secular institution, not religious. So that was all very interesting. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that as someone who had primarily been raised as a Christian and in Christian communities or Christian adjacent communities, and also someone who had had experience with some more indigenous and African-based traditions, I began to, through our work, understand the dynamic of Christian privilege and what that was in the United States. That I was someone, even though as an African American person, I may not have access to some kinds of power. As a person who identifies as gay, I might not have access to some kinds of power. As a person who had been raised as a Christian, I was someone, at least in the United States and certainly in New York City, and in the communities in which I traveled, where there were a great number of privileges and some power that was afforded to me that people of other religious and spiritual backgrounds did not have or had to demand, or almost kind of resigned themselves to the idea that they would not be treated as equally as others. And that realization gave me certainly a different perspective on what was possible in terms of my personal beliefs, but it also encouraged me that in places and spaces where there are people who identify as Christian, that I see it as a responsibility to make sure that their voices and experiences are heard. And here's the thing, everyone may not agree with them, but it is critical that those of us who, in spaces where there are people who do not identify as Christian, that we make space for the voices and the experiences of other people. And for me, that is a part of the way in which I try and live Tanenbaum's mission in my personal life. And thank you so much for the question. And I think we have time for some more questions if anyone else has a question. So Joe, it doesn't seem that there are any other questions right now.
I think that's it, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll look forward to having you and the team from Tanenbaum with us in Atlanta, February 23rd through 26th next year.
It will be our pleasure. Very much looking forward to it. And thank you again so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mark. We're so grateful to have you and all of our participants today. Thank you all for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody soon on another workshop and in Atlanta in February. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.